with a scene, I think, with Trump's personal lawyer, Boris Epstein. Am I right?
Exactly.
And I want to ask you about him because I read this morning, I think in the Wall Street Journal, that Boris Epstein, who's an unusual character, is actually the one guiding the president over his policy regarding law firms and all these executive orders and deals he's doing with the law firms. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting because your depiction of Boris Epstein in All or Nothing is fairly interesting. So maybe you can talk a little bit about who this guy is and why he wields such influence with Trump.
Well, and it's not just the law firms. It's virtually any legal issue that is now coming before the White House, um, and but some of the significant people in the Justice Department, in the White House counsel's office, have all been, in some instances, handpicked by Boris and certainly vetted by Boris. And I mean, he's the president's closest legal advisor. That much vaunted idea of Trump's personal attorney. That's Boris Epstein. And it's interesting because he is not in the White House,
Right.
not an employee of the White House. So, but at the same time that he's advising the White House on all of the legal issues that come before the executive branch, he's also taking on his own clients outside. So he is presumably making a substantial amount of money on this relationship. But Boris Epstein has he was born in Russia, emigrated to the U.S. as a child. Um, Went to law school, practiced. Grew up in New Jersey. Went to law school, practiced law for a very short period of time, and then got into Republican politics. In initially, one of his initial points of entry was that he became uh, um, a surrogate in the Sarah Palin camp. I mean, he essentially became a professional surrogate.
Right.
Um, um, and then he entered in 2015. He entered the Trump circle, and he was a kind of marginal figure on the Trump fringe. Um, but again, serving that function, the surrogate. In 2015, there weren't many people willing to be Trump surrogates, and and he and he then when they won, he went into the White House, but didn't last. He lasted really a matter of weeks. They kind of said security concerns, and he was bounced out of the White House. But nevertheless, doggedly kind of stayed in the orbit. And then when after the election, in the whole Steele and in that period when all of the respectable voices were fleeing, he then took a substantial role. In fact, matter of fact, became Rudy Giuliani's kind of main conduit between Rudy and the White House, and and then after Trump returned to Mar-a-Lago, there was Boris hanging in there on the phone with Trump constantly, and then throughout the campaign, there were, by some estimates, he was on the phone with Trump 20 times a day. You couldn't. There was just no daylight between Boris and Trump, and that was sort of cemented because Boris developed in just a keen sense of being able to say what Trump wanted to hear.
Yes, and yet, in spite of all of that, one of the sort of great intrigues in your book is this question of whether or not Boris is wearing a wire,
Right,
right? That,
right. I mean, nobody, and Boris is deeply unpopular with the Trump staff. Um, Incredibly popular with Trump, devoted to Trump, Trump devoted to Trump. Therefore, Trump protected him at all moments, including when he was arrested in Arizona for pawing a girl, I think several girls in a bar. This is all
Mhm.
on video, and then drunk in the gutter. Um, the kind of thing that in any other political circle would have been death went by without a ripple um, in the Trump circle. But all of the people around Trump kept, I mean, they were aware he was called to testify in several investigations. He was but then not indicted, and they couldn't figure out why would that be. Why would other people less involved be indicted but not Boris? So this was a constant discussion during the campaign. Had Boris flipped? Was he? Then there was a rumor was that he was wearing a wire. Always a rumor that he was being investigated in other cases. But from Trump's point of view, none of that made any difference. Boris was loyal. Well, at least Trump assumed that he was loyal, and more importantly, just would always say what Trump wanted to hear,
so do you,
overruling all of the other lawyers who had vastly more legal
right?
experience than Boris did.
And do you have any idea what Boris's relationship is like with Pam Bondi? And obviously, I mean, you write in the book he knows her deputy Todd Blanche.
He
Um,
brought Todd Blanche in. Todd Blanche was Boris's lawyer, and um, and um, and then he became Trump's lawyer. That was the way that happened, and then went into the White House, and that was from the beginning. Boris talking Todd Blanche, who
mhm.
had partnership in a major law firm. This is why you should come and work for Donald Trump, the worst client in the world, because of the power that we will that 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 together we can have in a Trump White House.
So, do you have any idea now? Sort of now, obviously, that your book is over. How often Boris talks to the president? How much of an influence he is
Yeah,
over?
all of the time. I mean,
Well,
there is almost I mean, a constant thing. It's always he picks up, yeah, and that's always Boris.
right.
And even during the campaign, it was funny. Even Trump would make fun of Boris as the yes man. Why he would always say what Trump wanted to hear. He would hold up the phone. Oh, it's my Boris. He's going to tell me why being indicted again is so great.
Okay. Well, I mean, in that vein, another of the great sort of characters in the book is a young woman by the name of Natalie Harp. Um, and again, I think she provides quite a lot of narrative tension. I mean, you keep reading it because you want to know what is going to happen to this young woman who is obsessed with President Trump and following behind him in a golf cart with again, showing him things he wants to read about himself. So my question to you, though, is where is Natalie Harp now?
Just outside of the Oval Office.
Because we don't see her in the way we see Caroline Levitt,
Right.
but
Well,
so she's
Caroline
there.
Levitt is just a fake person, really. Um, she just goes out in front of the press. She has no authority and no stature, no power. Natalie, though, sits right outside of the president's office, is the keeper of still the keeper of much of the information that the president sees. Um, if you want to get into the Oval, if you want to see the president, you go through Natalie. Laura Loomer, when she appeared in the Oval Office, what was that now? 10 days ago.
Hmm.
That was because of Natalie. So, I mean, if you want access, you need Natalie Harp.
So do we deduce then from that Susie Wiles, who one gets the impression from your book wasn't necessarily a Natalie fan, has basically had to put up with this?
Yeah,
That
she has. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why Susie Wiles has been successful um, in her in her job and in her relationship with Trump. She knows what she has to put up with.
Well, so let me ask you this, Michael.
And just let me add that they have repeatedly tried to they the 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 immediate Trump orbit tried to get rid of Natalie as they have tried to get rid of Boris. Um, Failed. It always fails.
Well, so so brings me on to my next question, which is when you read your book, one is struck, as one has often been with Trump, about sort of the chaos of the world around him, the moment to moment, the factions. And yet, when I go to DC now, which is fairly often, one of the messages that I hear from certain people around Trump is this is a different presidency
This is
from the last one. He's had 4 years to think about it.
it's total
They're
bullshit.
organized.
Bullshit. It does
Okay.
nothing. It
Okay.
doesn't exist in reality. I mean, what else are you going to say though? It's like the last one, a complete catastrophe. So obviously, that's not what is going to be said, but it is the same as the last one, and it is just you kind of wait for the day that everyone when the wheels formally come off the bus, whether that's today, tomorrow, or next week, they certainly will. And obviously, we're beginning to see signs of this. The tariffs, which were just like, how did that happen? How did it happen that he imposed these tariffs? How did it happen that he removed them? Pete Hegseth and the Signal chat,
Signal.
this will now go on and compound itself, and we are again back in crazy town.
Well, so just thinking about Signalgate, I wanted to get your thoughts on something that hasn't really, I don't think, been talked about enough, which is the role of Stephen Miller. Because one does get the sense, he has had 4 years to think about the kind of policies he wants to implement, specifically immigration. And I was quite struck on that Signal thread, how there was a lot of back and forth and this and that, the other. And it seemed to me that the person who shut it all down and said, actually, hang on, we've had a directive from President Trump, that's it, was Miller. And I was curious, in all your reporting of the book, how important is he? What's that relationship like with Trump?
It's less important than the media makes this out to be. I mean, Stephen is you know on the spectrum. I think everybody understands that he is treated like that, so it's a kind of circumscribed relationship. Oh, that's Stephen. So if everyone understands the tenor of his remarks, of his suggestions, and of his power. Um, at one point in the campaign, which I relate this in the book, the New York Times called the campaign and wanted to do a deep dive on their immigration policies,
Mhm.
of which they didn't really have. and in a kind of in a flurry, they sent out Stephen to talk to the New York Times, um, and then that resulted in a a headline about all of the horrible things that Trump was going to do, which it might seem that he is now doing. But within the campaign, they said they were like holding their heads, and then they said, our bad, for sending Stephen out with his masturbatory fantasies, um, which was the words, the exact words that were used. So to sort of align that. So Stephen is obviously in the White House and is obviously a prominent voice in the White House. Trump listens to him. um, um, I'm just trying to express how he, when Trump finds what he's saying to be useful, in other words, when what Stephen Miller says comports to the narrative Trump sees, which are the headlines Trump will get, then Stephen has a central place. But otherwise, it is he remains someone who no one is comfortable talking to. So he talks in a strange kind of spectrumy way.
Right.
Um, and that's it. There is, again and again and again, in the Trump White House, you have very strange people. Um, People who would not be at home, would not be eligible to be in other White Houses, and everybody has to somehow accommodate themselves to the fact that Trump tolerates them or has uses for them.
Although one big difference, which obviously I pay great attention to, is the absence of his daughter and Jared Kushner, and possibly because of that, there are fewer leaks coming out
Well,
from this White
yeah,
House.
you mean because Jared was a major leaker? Yeah, of
Well,
course.
and because
But
there's also not these different camps. I mean, I think that maybe there are tensions between Peter Navarro and Scott Bessent, there's not this deeply unpopular
Well,
couple
I,
who
I don't I
everybody
don't
sort of
know about
dislikes.
that. I mean, I think that there's enormous tension, huge tensions, within the White House, knives out all over the place. But Susan.